for coming here tonight. Despite the good weather, you chose to be inside, which is a testimony to your interest in the topic or your hay fever symptoms. So my name is Leo Ranieri. I'm part of SPY 25 in SPE, and we are the youth editorial board of SPY 25. And so we try to organize events that speak to our generation and the questions we have. And I think something that came up regularly in our conversations this year is sort of dissatisfaction with the left and with progressive politics. And we felt like, the topics we felt were important, like, the genocide in Gaza, working conditions, the cost of living, etc., were not appropriately talked about in politics by left-wing and progressive actors. And so, that sort of led to this event, because one of the proposed answers by some left intellectuals is left populism. The title of this event is inspired by this poem by William Butler Yeats, an Irish poet that wrote this poem after the First World War. I'm not going to read it to you because I don't want to, but what I will do is talk to you about left populism just a little to have an introduction. So one of the leading scholars and theorists of left populism is Chantal Mouffe. Chantal Mouffe is a Belgian political theorist who works in the UK. And basically she argues that since the late 70s and the 80s, so the era of Thatcher and Reagan, both center-left and center-right parties accepted the basic tenets of neoliberalism. So that is deregulation, privatization, reduction of the welfare states, and fiscal austerity. And she argues that this convergence of the political spectrum towards this neoliberal center had very nefarious effects for the left because it led to its disarticulation. So the left, by adopting these neoliberal tenets, abandoned class politics in favor of a third way, which you might know as the socially liberal but fiscally conservative type of people. That we recognize by a sort of technocratic establishment parties who are driven by the language of identity and often disconnected from labor union and workers' movement. She calls this moment neoliberal hegemony, but she's also arguing that in recent years it is losing popular support because the precarization of the middle class and the lower middle class that resulted from the austerity policies that were instaured after the 2008 crisis led to a feeling, a subjective feeling of disempowerment and a feeling of being the leftovers, the left behind of globalization. And that's also something we observe empirically in studies explaining why people move away from establishment parties towards more radical parties. It's this feeling of subjective work insecurity, for example. In short, things fall apart and the neoliberal center cannot hold. And a type of political actors that have gained from this moment are right-wing populists. So right-wing populists have gained tractions by telling the people that they had been cheated by the elite, the political elite, the economic elite sometimes. And they translated those feelings of exclusion and of being perceived as, the left behind of globalization. They used this feeling and they translated them into a nationalistic and often racist vocabulary. And in doing so, they succeeded in mobilizing a very passionate voter base, because the worst are indeed full of passionate intensity. The questions we ask tonight is what the left can learn from this success of the populist far right. Are there techniques that we could adopt to replicate that political success? And also, what are the dangers of entering this populist era? What are the potential pitfalls? So to answer these lovely, happy questions, we have a panel of fantastic speakers. First, we have André Krouwel. André teaches political science and communication at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. He's also the founder and co-owner of Keys Compass, which is a leading developer of vote advice applications. And his research focused mostly on political parties, voting behavior, populism, extremism, and conspiracy beliefs. And next to André, we have Lillian Cicerchia. She is assistant professor of political theory at the University of Amsterdam, and she focuses on political economy, feminism, and critical theory. She's also the co-host of the podcast What's Left of Philosophy, where the discussions range from contemporary critical social theory to Marxism in quite a playful, engaging way, if I do say so myself. And last but not least, we have Marthe van Bronkhorst. Marthe is a writer and neuropsychologist. She's an outspoken writer in political subject matter in various media, including De Groene Amsterdammer, and has a column for the magazine Hard Hoofd. She's also a psychologist in Amsterdam, and her fiction debut about young boys in the manosphere will come out this winter, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, this was maybe a boring introduction using a poem, like who cares? So I also have a sort of visual explanation of this phenomenon that was coincidentally posted by Links in het Nieuws Instagram account, where we can see the sort of cyclical nature of uninspiring centrists who refuse to tackle the underlying political problem, which leads to stagnating living standards as a result of the adoption of these neoliberal tenets, fueling the far right. So, yeah, maybe you don't agree, maybe you do, but I think this image speaks to the role that the left has in fueling these dynamics that the populist far right thrives upon. So, yeah, let's move on to the conversation now. Can you hear me? You cannot hear me. Can you hear? And no? Okay. Can you hear this one?
Deze doet het. Why don't we start with this one?
Yeah, we can start with this one and pass it around. So first, I want to ask you, sort of as a way of rounding off this introduction, whether you agree with this diagnosis of a collapse of the neoliberal center. Is this something you think has analytical value?
Does my phone in?
I think that's certainly true, and I think I was a skeptic of this idea of the collapse of the center until the past few months. I think that maybe for the first time since the beginning of the second Trump administration, I have started to see the old Gramsci saying that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. I think the new is being born right now. So I think we're actually maybe past this question in time a bit. I think that there was a series of collapses of the center. And I think the real question is whether or not the rest of the political spectrum, at least for me, is going to try to drag what is happening back to what happened before, or what was going on before, which I think is not going to work. I don't think that's possible. That's why I think the new is actually being born right now. I think that is a failing strategy, even for the liberal center. And the question is whether, and I think there's a real, perhaps ironically, I think this creates a real opening in some sense for the left, which is what made me interested in being on this panel. Because things are unsettled and we are genuinely in a moment of change. How the political left chooses to react to this and whether or not it further entrenches the familiar lines of polarization and its alliance with the liberal center, or whether or not it starts to carve out an independent response and reaction to what's happening to right now. I think a lot rides on that. So I would say yes, but we might be even further along in the process.
Yeah, so I think the crisis started earlier. So you can see clearly that's already Otto Kirchheim, for example, in the 1940s, late 1940s, early 1950s, already started to complain that basically the left, and he meant social democrats in particular, had ceased to perform transformative politics. And he started to call that Allerweltsparteien, or catch-all parties, that basically abandoned their old ideology. They no longer basically attacked the core elements of capitalism, and they started so basically to accept and a sort of post-war consensus of where they would accept most of the tenets of capitalism, and they would just do redistributive politics. So the promise of the building up of a welfare state, but very much in line with basically what Bismarck had already started, right? So very small steps. They sort of abandoned real transformative politics and real redistribution of power next to wealth. And then you see, and then I think what the second phase is what you hinted at, that they then go a step further, and also the Social Democrats start to accept neoliberalism in a sort of around, I would say, after the 70s crisis, oil crisis, and then they also start to accept austerity. And then a third phase, I would say, is even going further. Now they also accept that basically Europe is only a market, and they start to accept, I think, very far-reaching ways of also flexibilization of the labor market, the abandonment of social housing. So I would say that the process, you can see, and Otto's right about it, already started in the 50s already, maybe even just immediately after the Second World War, had that real transformative politics on the left was abandoned by, say, the center left that was always in power. The communists, so the more radical left, mostly where they were communists, they were, of course, they were tainted by the communists in the East Bloc, and so they, the left was dominated by social democrats always. That collapsed somewhere after the 1990s. In the 1990s, some countries a little bit earlier, Italy. And so now we're in a vacuum where the left is fragmented into, I would say, three blocks. A sort of remnant of social democracy is left. There's a very radical left emerging, and there's a green left element in most countries. And they don't belong together. They don't have the same political agenda. They're very weakened. I'm not saying the right isn't weakened. We can talk about the right later, but tonight we're talking about the left, which is nice. And so the populist element in there is relatively small compared to, say, the populist element on the right. And I'm not so optimistic. I don't think there's a new project. I don't think the left knows what it's doing. I think the left has abandoned everything that made them, I think, valuable, especially in terms of securing income, building up a welfare state, but also providing houses, the most important thing. And I think they're also not tackling the real problems that we're going to have, and that is that we're going to have the biggest windfall ever. We're going to have a whole generation who's basically lottery winners. If your parents ever bought a house in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, you're going to be very wealthy because probably you're on your own or with basically one daughter, sister, or brother. And so you're all going to win the lottery at one point. So there's going to be a deep rift in society between families with on ownership and families who always rent it. And and I don't see any left-wing party thinking about this, any program. They're talking about, I don't know, windmills and zonnepanelen. And zonnepanelen are very right-wing. They are for people who already have a house. They are not left-wing politics. So I see a total, I would say, abandonment of left-wing politics. There is no new beginning. It's devastating. And the left is not going to govern anytime soon.
Can I respond to it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I think the original question was, is the center dead, right? Is not the left dead? I had some deja vu feelings of the other time I was here at SPUI when I got the question whether or not the left was dead and deceased. But I think the original question that you asked was is there still a center in our political spectre, right? And we agreed, I think, that there is no longer this evenly distributed political spectre as it once seemed, where you have a right extreme and maybe a left extreme and a reasonable middle, redelijke midden. And I think that is no longer there, but this was a gradual thing. But to me, the starting point of this, death of the center is maybe even more recent. Like for other people, it's already long in the past. But I think for a lot of people, what really was the breaking point is the standpoint of all our political parties in the genocide, right? So I think, and it's also been investigated that what poses itself as the reasonable middle never was really, moderated in its policies. It has been moving towards the right wing for years now. But for a lot of people, this wasn't clear, I think, because the policies that they were very right-wing about didn't affect them, because it was all migration policies. And now we see the unequivocal support for a genocide by almost all the parties in the political spectrum. And I think now it really opened the eyes of a lot of people, like, okay, there is no middle. There is no... Yeah, there is no such a thing as taking the middle position in whether or not supporting a genocide or not. So I think that's a breaking point, or maybe an eye-opening moment for a lot of people. Like, there is just the right and some crumps that call themselves the left. So I think this is one of the major things that was already there, like those parties that claim to be center-right, like CDA, are actually very right-wing, but it wasn't clear to a lot of people because they were not the people who were getting sent out of the country. They were not affected by pushbacks, I think. So in that sense, I do think that the Dutch politics is not going to be an ever-repeating, vicious cycle as in the meme. It's going to be more of a spiral, I think. It's going to get worse and worse at some point, and then people are going to ask for something different than just a reasonable middle party as an opposition to extreme right. And then maybe that's going to be a fruitful ground for left-wing populism. So I agree with you there, yeah.
Okay. So I think we can agree that there's disagreement about the extent of the crisis, its origins, of its history, but we can all agree that there is a crisis and at least a moment of change. I just want to go back to the poem one time, because you talk about it not being a circle but being a vortex, and the poem actually talks about the widening gyre. Right. I didn't know what it was. I googled it. It's like a spiral, a vortex, like something that becomes worse and worse. Just another interesting parallel. But yeah, I want to circle back to the point of the proposition of this evening, which is about left populism and whether or not that could be a viable answer in this time of crisis. But before doing that, maybe we should have a sort of little definition of populism, because it's a word that is used in a lot of contexts to qualify various things. So maybe André, you can start by briefly defining populism through your research from a scholarly perspective.
Yeah, just a warning, there is no agreement on what populism is, by the way, which is highly problematic in a science that can't even agree on very basic elements of populism. So I choose always to use the work of Koen Abts. He is a scholar from Belgium who I admire, and he basically argues, with Rummens, by the way, so he's not doing it alone, and he argues that basically populism in the core is two elements. It is the populist claiming to understand the people like no one else, and also representing the people, without any evidence of that, by the way. So that's just a claim that the populist makes. And so because of that claim that this populist knows the people, which is usually seen as homogeneous, and sort of one, because they exclude everybody who's not like them. So it becomes very homogeneous if you think about it like that. And so that populist then, because he or she knows best what the people want, has all the legitimacy to then implement all kinds of policies. Against that is another element, and Koen Abts argues that's the elite arguing, basically based on the rule of law, that is not the rule of men, but it's the rule of law, and that minorities need to be protected, that you need to you have limits on what you can do when you're in power. It's not just legality, it's not just what people want. People want the craziest things. I think you know. People know nothing about politics most of the time. They know nothing about policies. They are very badly informed about most of the issues. And so They want all kinds of crazy and also inconsistent things. And so it's good to have some regulations, some laws, some processes, some institutions. And that's what what's usually the establishment argues. And that's what the populists fight against, because that actually blocks them, of course, in doing all the stuff that they want. And so this clash of the populists arguing that he or she knows everything and knows best and knows exactly what the people want, with the exclusion of the others who are not supposed to be there. And then the elite, establishment usually seen, but we're all part of that because we're all working at institutions that are terrible in the eyes of populists. We think that the rule of law is a thing and there should be laws and a constitution and there should be limits to power. And that clash is very central to populism. And I like that much more than the crazy debate on how small or big the populism ideology is or something. That's a whole debate around the Kasmudde. But that, for me, that's not this. The core is this. And Krouwel also says this. She's very good, I think, also in arguing this clash between legitimacy and legality is a very core element of populism. And we cannot solve that. It's the core problem of every representative democracy. And populism just claims to have the solution by the rule of man and disregarding the rule of law. See Trump, right? He tramples on everything that is basically the rules.
Yeah, thank you. And Lillian, would you add something or challenge a part of this definition?
There were multiple parts of that definition. I think the part that sounds right to me is the part that indicates that there's a kind of mirroring of a supposed voice of the people. You can't hear me? Okay. Is this better? Okay. I think the part of the definition that seems right to me is the part where you talk about the populist candidate or party leader or figurehead as being some kind of reflection of or being able to mirror a set of desires back to people and say that they represent them and know what they really want, and seem to be able to do that with some credibility. And I'm not sure I followed exactly the rest of the definition that you gave, but that seems right. I will say that maybe it's something that could diverge a little bit from the spirit of what you said, is that I do think there's a lot of emphasis on people who are in a populist state of mind or favoring populist candidates, that they don't, that they're ignorant about politics and that they don't really know what's going on. The people that I know who have voted for right-wing candidates back home, some of them have been talking about the same political issues for 30 years, and they tend to be political issues that until recently, what they consider the liberal elite has been basically telling them that they were stupid, like Neanderthals, for thinking about or caring about, and as it turns out, they're serious problems.
Do you have examples of this kind of?
So, for instance, in the 1990s, both of my parents were in a trade union, which is, maybe you know, and the U.S. is kind of a unique place to have in society. That's not normal in the private sector. And they both experienced the attack of the companies and with government support to deregulate the airline industries. They worked for the airlines. And they gutted their health care, and they broke the unions, and the unions were entirely complicit with this. The kind of rage that those people feel at institutions of the nominal left cannot be underestimated. And I promise you that if you ask, and I lived in New York for 8 years, I know this, if you asked an Upper West Side liberal who reads the New Yorker what they think about that, they wouldn't even know it happened. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that people do know things about their own lives, and they tend to know different things depending on their social position. This is something that the left should understand. How they make sense of that and what politics they become attracted to is a story that I believe political scientists are in a better position to explain than myself, depending on context. But I don't really love the idea that populism is a product of ignorance or that people just don't know things. I think they know different things. And I think that there's a real there to some of the problems that are going on. And a feature of contemporary populism is that the political left and liberals have been telling them that to not believe their other love and eyes for a long time. And if you think that populists are wrong about a political issue, and right-wing populists, and I certainly think they're wrong about almost all of them, you have to have an answer for the political problems that concern them. You can't just tell people that what you're experiencing in your life doesn't exist. You can't just do what Joe Biden did, which is tell the entire American population that things were actually great, that they were doing way better than they think, that they should be glad the economy is doing so well. Okay, I'll stop here, but I do think that the definition of populism that does not take seriously the way that people see problems in their own lives, and a left that wants to respond to those things, you're not going to get anywhere unless the left wants to understand.
Yeah. Do you have something to add, or?
No, that's all.
I think we have been describing right-wing populism so far, so I haven't heard anything back that I would say is left-wing populism, which exists as well. And I think, so the main, I would say what is populism? It's like, I'm a little bit more free in my definition, maybe it's what you make of it. So I use left-wing populism as a geuzennaam, I don't know how to translate it, a name that I wear in pride, because I think we should define what that is, and it doesn't have to be defined by this is a homogeneous group that doesn't tolerate diversity. Not if it's left-wing populism, it's not going to be that. So I think you can broaden that definition a little bit more than the things that you guys said. I think one of the main defining characteristics, but again, I look at throughout my psychological lens to the world, but I think one of the main defining characteristics of populist politics is that they use emotion a lot, and that they make an appeal to emotion, and that they do that both in rhetorics but also in their policies. Like there doesn't seem to be a great cognitive and thought-out plan in what Trump is doing right now. I think it's, but people might disagree. So it's an emotional way of appealing to the public, appealing to people's onderbuikgevoelens, gut feelings, and it's and emotional doesn't have to be just a right-wing kind of emotion. I'm saying that the left can also appeal to emotion. The left, as you very correctly mentioned, or the former left, has also been deceived, does also experience anxiety, anger, legitimate anger, and does also have a good sense for hypocrisy when they see it. So these are all all feelings that we can also appeal to, and I think the emotional part is one of the core characteristics of the populist way of doing politics. So yeah.
I think we will go back to the emotional part right after this, but first to sort of illustrate the transition between your two contributions. When Lillian, you were talking about how there hasn't been an answer of the left, or at least the more liberal center, social democrat left, to the real difficulties and challenges people were experiencing in relation to their working conditions and the quality of their life. There have been some actors on the left that have been qualified as left populists in the media and in academia. I think here we can see the now disgraced Jeremy Corbyn in the middle, Jean-Luc Mélenchon and La France Insoumise in France, Podemos in Greece, Podemos in Spain, and Tsipras, that was his name? I forgot. Tsipras in Greece. And then, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were now quite big names in American politics and often described as left populists. We can also talk about the PTB, PVDA in Belgium, and Raoul Edebouw were also qualified as left populists. And these actors are sort of mobilizing emotions in a way, and they are also using the populist rhetoric of articulating a discourse where the ills of society are the result of a particular elite, in this case, generally an economic elite. Just to illustrate the existence of actors that we might qualify as left populist. I don't know if you have any commentary on these particular images or what might...
Yeah, so it's very interesting because Corbyn actually got more votes than the current government of Labour. And he also had a very radical program, so he wanted to tax the rich to build houses. He is really left-wing. Britain would be a different place if this guy had won a little bit more seats. But I think it's interesting because if you see all these people together, they're not, I think, as coherent as we usually think about the extreme right. Because I think they have this very core element. We always know that they're anti-immigration, sort of Eurosceptic. And it's very difficult to see what these people then have together. Like I said, there's very green elements in there. There's very lefty sort of old Labour in one of them. There's very modern anti-austerity parties here that basically came up as protest movements, but not even a real party. Like that's why it's collapsing at the moment. Podemos is Unidos Podemos. It's the same thing. And so I think you can see that the left, what we call then maybe radical left or extreme left or populist left, is not so clear in its program, and also most of these parties, the radical left parties, are not very powerful. When are left-wing populist leaders, or sort of maybe leaders that appeal more to the left-wing emotions, successful is when they actually occupy traditional parties. When Bernie Sanders would have won, when Corbyn would have won, Trump occupying a party, Jörg Haider taking over the FPÖ. So inside parties, usually populists become very important when they take over a traditional party. I think new political parties on the left, radical parties on the left, will have very little, I would say, staying power. I did a research into new political parties together with Paul Lucardi. And we analyzed political parties, and most parties don't even become a teenager, right? Most parties die after one term in parliament, and more than 60% have disappeared after 2 parliaments, and there's only a few percentage left after 3 elections of most new parties. So new parties don't survive. You need basically, if you want a revival of the left or a populist left, you need to be able to combine powers on the left that are still there with... in a new shape or form. And this is basically also maybe my misconception that what I was just saying about the center not holding versus the left. I think the center, the traditional center, was the Christian and Social Democrats. They were the center. They had 80 to 90% of all the votes in most countries. They were the center. They didn't hold. And I think in the current times, there will be no center that will be holding. I think we're heading to a warlike situation. There's a very warmongering going on, and I think it's also your argument about that we basically don't say anything against genocide in the Gaza Strip. We let basically Putin do things until now, recently, but in 2014 he could do what he wanted. And so I think we're letting slip basically the sort of I think there's going to be war in Europe, and I think the left has no answer to that. So it's not only just about, say, the economic crisis. There's really also a much more bigger doom heading our way, I think.
Yeah, if you define the left as the traditional parties, as you just do, then it paints a very negative picture. I would become pessimist as well. But I think that populism...
Is it disputed that the Christian and Social Democrats were centrist? I don't think so, right?
No, not at all. But if you define the left as... What is in parliamentary left, then yes, paints a very negative picture because, there are almost no anti-war parliamentary representatives. So that's, there's not a lot of representation for left-wing people who are against this wapenwetloop, warmongering, etc. But I don't agree necessarily that a party has to be populist. I think it's usually individuals within parties that have populist tendencies. And I also don't necessarily agree with that in the past some political parties have died a quick death, so we should never try to erect a new left-wing party again. I don't think that the past circumstances were comparable to this extreme that we're right now in. But yeah, so if we look back at our own country, we see that populism has arisen very successfully, and also in new parties. And for example, FVD and of course PVV. It's also somebody who has been doing the populist, or like maybe even demonstrating the populist game for nearly 30 years now. So I think it can be very successful and also long-lasting, but it doesn't mean that you have to have your entire party behave like populists. You just need a populist leader or certain people within the party that play this game and that break the rules of the generic institutions and that constantly push the entire political debate to the extreme, or hijack the political debates. That's already enough to have populism, I think, in the parliamentary politics. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also what complicates this discussion is that we're talking about broad political phenomenon in a sort of abstract ways, but it of course depends on the local context and the parliamentary setup of all of these countries, because it is much harder to come up with a new radical left party in the US or in the UK than it might possibly be in a more multi-party democracy. But one characteristic that is existing across all political systems nowadays is social media, and the fact that the digital sphere has an increasingly big influence on our political behaviors. And so something we've noticed also is how populists, and especially right-wing populists, perform extremely well online, especially among younger people. I think in the Netherlands, Thierry Baudet is very, unfortunately, but like a very big social media personality. And André, I wanted to ask, based on your research, how can we explain this success online? Why does the populist rhetoric work so well with algorithms?
Yeah, because two things. One is they can escape all the filters, so they can escape the quality journalism, so the fact-checking and always hearing two sides and sort of having a real argument. And so you see also an expenditure and all this research that is done, where do you see the advertising and where do you see the activity? And you also see that populists dominate social media, and then you see that mainstream parties, they dominate mainstream media. And so the other thing is not only that they can escape all the filters and the checks and say quality journalism, where they are basically being challenged about their ideas. The other thing is also they work through a very emotional level, like we talked before. And for example, my work with Jan Willem van Prooijen, who's a social psychologist or political psychologist, we study how extremism basically, so the mechanism of extremism. And the mechanism of extremism is basically this, that people who feel very much stress, so there's a lot of stressors in their life, there's a lot of anxiety about things in their life, and usually they are basically economic, by the way, so they're not at all cultural, they're mostly economic. But people feel like stress in their life, and what happens then is that they want more immediate solution. So they basically switch into what we call a black and white thinking, a Manichaean worldview. There's little space for nuance because you're really in trouble, so things need to be changed. So you become more and more black and white thinking and have little time for, say, nuances and complexity. So they reduce complexity. That's also why they like conspiracy theories. And then what they also become is that basically what they then become also is overconfident in their own judgment. So I know I'm not supposed to say that some people have little cognitive abilities to understand politics, but our research really shows, for example, that unlike what we normally suggest, namely that populists and extremists are very critical, they're actually uncritical. So they're goedgelovig, they're very gullible. And we did some tests, and we can show that people who are populists and also extremists, they basically believe everything. You can basically tell them anything and they'll go along with even esoteric things, talking to demons. And so they basically have less capability of critically assessing information. And so they're very gullible, and that means that they live in a world where they have very fixed ideas, and they love having these ideas basically confirmed. That's why they love also social media, because they can talk to each other. And when they hear anything else, basically for them that has the same level of quality. They don't distinguish between things that are actually true and things that actually don't exist. So we gave them things that basically, we gave them things that don't exist. We asked them, what do you know about this? Do you know a lot about this? Are you sure you know a lot about this? And they go along with that. They claim all kinds of knowledge that they cannot have because we just made up Queen Chatuk and made the Toxide. And so you see that this gullibility, this inability to critically assess, also doesn't allow them to make a good analysis, and they also become, because of this fear and this inability to sit down and really think about it, they also become out-group derogatory, so they immediately have a lot of out-groups that basically should not be here. And so, which creates another stress, and so you have this vicious circle that was in your gyration, in your poem. This gyration goes on and on and on in their lives, and it becomes worse and worse. And that's basically what happens in a brain, in a mindset of extremism and populism.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, though, because I think a lot of people of us on the left also experience high stress and high anxiety. Yes. And a lot of us, I'm going to speak for a lot of us, are not rich at all. So we're considered the elite, but we don't have any money and we don't have any houses to live in. So we also have very high day-to-day stress. And I don't think that just experiencing stress and a difficult political climate automatically leads you into kind of a filter that you come out as a racist. So I also think that, well, that you become out-group negative or yes. Yeah, but it wouldn't automatically mean that
you have out-groups, right?
Yes,
so
of course, but
why?
it doesn't mean that that being under stress and maybe polarizing automatically means becoming right-wing populist. I think this.
No,
I feel that this
both sides. This is not about right-wing populism. It's extremism. There's both sides.
Right. So I think I miss in your analysis that you could take a different turn depending on what social media environment you are embedded in, and I think we shouldn't lose out of sight that the way that social media is designed, like by programming and the algorithms, is just very serving, very helpful for the political right, because we all know the mechanisms of attention economy. We know that social media are designed in such a way that they want to grab your attention and retain it as long as possible, because this is where the advertising money comes from, you seeing as many advertisements as possible. So the things that thrive well on social media, the kind of messaging that goes well on social media, is usually things that are surprising or extreme or violent or cause a lot of traction because it generates discussion. Everybody is familiar with this principle, and usually that means that right-wing political messages will go well. If it's a left-wing but also very extreme and attention-grabbing message, it will probably be banned or shadow banned, because right-wing people own social media, because they're in the hands of, with maybe the exception of Blue Sky, billionaires. So the entire social media infrastructure, the way that the algorithms work, the way that advertisements are important, and that advertisers want you to be on the platform, so advertisers are not going to be on a platform that is negative to big money, obviously. They're not going to be in a hostile environment. So the entire structure of it is serving to the right. And the left can become successful, I think, in social media, but you need an attention-grabbing message. You need to employ the same mechanisms, and you're still operating in a hostile environment. We should be very aware of that. And I don't think that just being stressed and being chronically online, because I'm both, automatically will make you racist or very non-accepting to other people. I would even challenge that. So I know that you did research on that, I'm very curious about the specific
Facts.
methodology. Yeah, because I'm a psychologist. Trust me. So I'm very curious about the specific methodology.
I'll gladly
and
send you the
instances.
literature and we can discuss it.
Yeah.
What I think very nice, your analysis is completely Chomsky. I mean, you're completely right about the ownership and media being commercial and that they want people on the platform. And so that's another driver. So I'm not saying it's the only thing stresses, the only thing and causes everything. And you're also right that, of course, the structure and the ownership, like Chomsky pointed out, what was that, in the 50s already? In the 60s for sure? That the ownership of media and the way that media operate and the fact that it's a commercial company and basically wants to sell your attention to commercial owners is why the media is so bad and why we should not assume ever that the media is there to make good citizens and well-informed citizens. That's not the task of the media. Everybody who thinks that is a very naive liberal.
So I'm not sure that I think... what was the original question? That it was was it about emotions on social media, or whether or not the left uses emotions well in relation to?
Yeah, I think the question was that first what the science of André shows is that people have economic insecurities and that these are being canalized into particular discourses that are often racist and out-group negating. I think it's not only race, it's also against trans people, against migrants, etc. And then the left is just not doing that. It's just not taking those economic insecurities and translating them.
Sorry, that's not true. That's not true. They do that against farmers. You see the left, the radical left against farmers, do that against hunters, they do that against Christians. No, there's a lot of also, the same mechanism also goes for the extreme left. The extreme left is nothing different in their mindset than the extreme right. Extremism as a mechanism works on both sides of the political spectrum. We can show time and time again, already now in 15 years of study, that there's a curvilinear relationship.
I would disagree.
Sure. And you can disagree with facts, and that is also a big trait of extremism, that you negate facts. But if you show for 15 years over and over again that both extremes, both left and right, have the same psychological mechanism, both have outgroup derogation, both have simplistic life view, you can say, okay, that for me doesn't exist because I don't feel that, or my people don't feel that. Okay, but we can show that this is really going on in the mindset, and negating that mechanism, that both sides do that, and that moderates are a different, say, breed of political people than extremists on both sides. Negating that also doesn't allow you to make a good analysis of politics.
Are moderates really different?
They are.
Because I think
yes, they are.
the people who call themselves moderates are just moderate because they call themselves moderate, but they are not, right? So usually their views on foreigners are very extremist. And they're only moderate because somebody has decided to stamp them as moderate in
Keir Starmer's. That would be an example of a moderate, like left center, who just said that the UK was being invaded by migrants.
Exactly, right. So if we were migrants, we would probably not call them moderate, right? Same as Sarah Wagenknecht, who is a populist, but who claims to be a populist, but who is very foreigner and negative, and is very she also wants strong migration policies. And I think that nobody would call those people moderate who are actually the victims of those policies. So I don't think those moderates are very different. I think they also have outgroup negative ideas in their head, but they are usually not taken into account because they are juxtaposed to people who are more openly extremist, so that they seem to be the more, casual middle group. But I think that's a misnomer. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the extreme left has a characteristic difference or an inherent difference from the extreme right, because I think the definition of being left is being intersectional, being there for minorities and not trampling on them. So that already excludes the possibility of, trying to victimize one group or sacrifice them for the other. True left people will also, of course, advocate for the right of farmers, but not to superimpose them on another group or victimize them for another group. So I don't think that true leftists that are extreme in that can be excluding of other groups or just as racist or just as outgroup negative. I think that's a matter of definition.
Lillian, did that clarify anything? Or
I guess I maybe wanted to give a different angle on this, like a little different shift in focus. So I think it's not controversial to say that the political left doesn't do like as well on social media. I think that that the algorithms work in the right's favor. That's probably all true, but we used to have this concept on the left. It was called the bourgeois press. Have you heard of this? Okay. It used to be that people understood that they were on a terrain that was to their disadvantage, okay? And the perspective of the political left from, you know, the old social democratic left, the kind of people who still thought of themselves as socialists, to like the communist left, they used to kind of take their disadvantage for granted and work with that. And the way that they worked with that is that they built up working class institutions, so that the only point of reference that people have when they engage in politics is not just social media debates. Now, no offense to people who are terminally online, but I'll give you my little narrative of like how I think it really does kind of shape your perspective if you are. It's like I wasn't really terminally online until the pandemic, then I really was, and then I took a step back, and I can tell you that it's like a wave like this, okay, and like my understanding of kind of like what's imminently important, what's like what has to be dealt with right now, what position do I have to take right now. This is called hyperpolitics, okay, where everything seems equally urgent all the time, and there's a very, very little ability to distinguish between different spheres of power and to create priorities, okay. The old left, what they did right was that they were able to go to power and to try to build working class institutions that were durable in centers of power. They went from the margins to the center. And in doing so, they were able to develop an oppositional counterculture on a terrain in which they took for granted that they were at a disadvantage. So the old way of like workplace leaflets on the shop floor and the newspapers, you know, despite how much Trotskyists today might try, are not going to come back. But what mattered about those things wasn't just the media, it was the institutions and the political culture they were building around it. And the fundamental problem with the far left today, and even, I would say, to the kind of like further end of the left populist spectrum, is that it has an ambivalent relationship to the political class to whom the left is supposed to relate. All of these people are trying to, what they all have in common is that they haven't figured that out. The working class in Europe and in North America are unable to figure out how to reconnect with a working class base that they are supposed to represent, okay? And some of them are blatantly uninterested in doing that. So until this gets figured out, all of this media conversation is derivative. So I just want to say it's not unimportant, but it's derivative. You're not going to change that political culture unless you have institutions in which people relate to one another to work through political questions in a way that orients them in space and time when they encounter these hyper-political debates.
I want to go back to Chantal Mouffe, like the theorist. We'll have a Q&A soon, so keep the questions. But Chantal Mouffe, like she also wrote a book with Ernesto Laclau already almost 50 years ago. And I think, Lillian, you're quite critical of that book, if I understand your online opinions correctly. But in that book, she also describes how since the 70s there's been a diversification of struggles, where the struggles traditionally related to class got mixed into different struggles for the environment, against racism, feminism, queer liberation, etc. And that the left has not been able to articulate a coherent political project because it had to let go of that, those class politics, and try to satisfy all these different struggles. And I just want to hear what you have to say about that, and like what kind of political subject do you think nowadays the left should speak for? Is it still that, ancestral working class? Is it still something that's relevant in today's political landscape?
I think it's undoubtedly relevant, and I don't think the working class is ancestral. Okay, so class formation, in the sense of like how classes form, happens as a process, and it happens through conflict. So the working class is not like only the industrial base. Okay, there's a story to be told in every Western European country about the transformation from the old industrial working class into different sectors. But millions of people continue to go to work for a living, and they work for a boss, and they have to go in and out every day, and that's what they have to do for their whole lives. So that is the relationship that matters. It doesn't matter what your occupation was in 1950. It matters whether or not that's what you have to do to get what you want. That's how I would describe social class. It's defined by what you have to do to get what you want. Okay? And people have to do different things to get what they want. The book that Chantal Mouffe, Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe wrote was a response to a crisis moment in the 80s in which the old left had lost its foothold in politics, and the new left could no longer had any steam. Okay, that's kind of the situation they were in. They articulated a theory of populism that was meant to be open-ended, radically democratic, and a kind of always evolving reconfiguration and reiteration of the people. This view is something that has been tried politically. It's been tried by Podemos, a little bit by Syriza. These other people are more ambiguous, okay? But it's something that it's one response to the crisis. I think that right now is a great time for people to start reconsidering that position. That maybe the neoliberal left took a position that it was kind of beyond the working class, and we might all want to be humbled by what's happening right now, take a step back, and wonder if that's so, and if the reason the working class seems irrelevant to left politics is because most people who are on the left are not working class. So that's the problem, that the left is currently populated by middle-class people. Not entirely, but mostly in every Western European and North American country except for Mexico, of which I'm aware.
And highly educated. Yes.
And highly educated. So the position that Laclau and Mouffe set out, I think, is the thing that needs to be re-evaluated today. Because if you can't bring the left politics back to its center, in which you can actually have leverage within the economy to shift the balance of power, you don't have an axis around all of the other social movements can turn. You are fish swimming in a aquarium that never touched the bottom. So it's not that the working class are the only people that matters. It's that when they move, the political floor shifts and the other things you want suddenly become possible, not on capital's terms, but on the terms of the public.
Yeah, I think most left-wing parties are trying to do just that, like what you're saying right now. They are trying to get back the middle class, but they are trying to do so by adopting more center or right-wing policies or right-wing ideas. So I think what you're describing is exactly what they think they are trying to do, but I think they are trying it in like the completely wrong way. So I think a lot of political parties in the Netherlands have slogans like het midden versterken en het maatschappelijk middenveld, so strengthening the middle and going through the center of society, I don't know, working with the center or the hardwerkende Nederlander, you know? But I think they're trying to make an appeal to a group that doesn't identify as one class.
Okay, then I've been misunderstood. Yeah. Let me rephrase. When I say return to the center, I mean organizing people in their communities and in their workplaces. I am not talking about political parties from the top down promising new things and trying to attract new people. The reason the working class is the center of left-wing politics historically is not because people care about them as special people, or they are good people, or that they are the hardworking Nederlander. They are the people who, when they associate together, they have to do so democratically to meet their needs. They can't do it as individuals. They have to do it as a collective. If they're going to put up a collective resistance to their boss, to their firm, to the sector of industry in which they work. Because they have to organize collectively, they are the cell of political democracy that can build outward. That's what the working class is able to do. It doesn't matter when they start, it doesn't matter who they are when they start doing that. They have to start engaging in reciprocal relationships with one another. They have to engage in deliberative democratic processes to aggregate their interests and to form that yearned after identity. If you can't start that, we are getting nowhere with left politics, which is why you have to actually be interested in organizing with people and learning from them and not telling them what they don't know or what they don't understand. People want to feel that the people who say they are speaking from them, from their perspective, are responsive to their needs. The only way you're going to do that is you're going to go out there and you're going to work with them and you're going to learn from them what their needs are.
But what are you referring to right now? Is it unions or is it NGOs or like what are you can you be specific?
Re-democratizing and refounding the trade unions would be a good start. So in Europe, there is my observation about the European left, please forgive me since I've moved here, is there's a very strong skepticism on the far left to trade unions because they are seen as bureaucratic, conservative, blah, blah, blah.
But isn't it also because a lot of people are freelancers?
Could be. Then maybe they should be thought about how to represent those people and their needs.
Right, it's a difficult thing.
Well, I'm sure it is, but it has also always been difficult to organize working class people. They are busy, they are tired, and they don't want to deal with bullshit. So asking them what they want and how you can help them is a first start. Re-democratizing trade unions is another thing to do, because people talk about them as conservative, stodgy institutions that will never go anywhere. But trade unions are just their members. That's how they get their political legitimacy and their power. If you want to change them, start to organize within them. Have meetings to democratize them. Secondly, community issues. Don't rely on NGOs that are basically responsive to donors and to political organizations that send them money. You have to have political organizations that are responsible to the people who are in them, membership organizations. Those could be new parties. I also am kind of pessimistic about the cycling of new parties, but membership organizations in which people organize together to build social movements. Those are the organs and the muscle of left-wing political life.
So can I
speak in your mic, please?
I always speak my mind.
No, in your mic.
Oh yeah, sorry. I never speak in the mic, but I always speak my mind. So you're wrong in the Netherlands about the radical left and union. So in the Netherlands, actually, the Labour Party were very closely aligned with the PvdA, the Labour Party, and actually during the 90s and noughts, the Labour movement, the unions, especially the FNV, have been taken over actually by SP'ers. So they actually dominate now, which is to the detriment of the Labour Party. Is always annoyed by that basically the radical left has taken over the unions and they can no longer use it as in the way that they they could. But I think you're right in the analysis of that. So somewhere in the second mover that we talked about, the left started to commodify people again. So their whole project post-war was decommodification, which means that there was a welfare state. So if you're ill or something else or you're old, you're being decommodified. You don't have to be constantly on the labor market. This has changed. The left has started to decommodify people again, forcing them to be on the labor market. And we did a study that can clearly show that your position on the labor market, the way you feel in your job, but also how secure you are about your tenure of job, is directly related to both left-wing and right-wing voting. So if you don't trust me, I know I have a problem with that. But read the work of Antonucci, who is the owner of that idea. I'm just doing the data analysis, but I'm fully responsible for the findings. That both left and right voting is closely related to you feeling either precarious in your tenure on the labor market, which means lose your job or have less hours, and also in the job, in your security, precarity, in your job. So how you think you can make a career in it. And so clearly labor market policies are very, very closely related to populist voting. And so the left, if they don't address this issue that you say, that how people feel in their work
But is it correlation or causation?
We cannot show in a discrete analysis the causation. The causation comes from good theory.
Yeah.
And
so
thinking about things.
Is the job insecurity, is it contributing? Is that the contributing causing factor for people to go to the right? Or are there just a lot of people who have job insecurity and also happen to be on the right? Because
let me say it again. There's an association between how you feel in your job and the likelihood you vote for a populist party. There's an association between you feeling either bad in your job or your tenure at Limburg and voting right-wing and left-wing politics, both right-wing and left-wing politics. So there is a labor market opportunity. Basically what my point is not about the statistics. My point is that both the left and right appeal to the same emotion, a labor market emotion. Why is the right wing winning there and winning over large parts of the working class, whereas the left wing apparently appeals to the same precarity feelings, the same sentiment? So it is a failure of the left, I think, and also of the radical left, but especially also of the center left, social democrats in particular, had to formulate a policy which I think should start with housing and decommodification again, and making people feel secure in their life. And I think there's a world to be won. I just don't think it will happen because all our institutions that are necessary, which would, for example, be strong unions. How do you unionize now? So we did a study into solidarity. So people have very, very low level of solidarity with people who are not like them. So when you are in the 50s and all the workers look alike, are of the same ethnic origin, all from the same regions, you have a very high level of solidarity. If you measure now a level of solidarity with your co-workers, it's very low for people, especially if they think that those people are from a different culture or not look like them or don't live like them.
Yeah, but why is that? It's because of constant media offensives of the right? It's not just because people are inherently non-solidary.
No. But I'm saying to reverse that is not easy. To reverse that...
No, but a myopic focus just on, I don't know, trade unions and worker circumstances is also not helping, because you're excluding from your analyses that people are influenced by way more than just their job insecurity. And I'm sorry to also disagree with you there, but I think people identify with political parties or with political movements, not just on the basis of their class. I don't usually think about myself as belonging to a class or working class. I don't even identify with working. I don't like it. So I think people identify more strongly with being a Swiftie than with being a social democrat, or with, identity is way more fluid and way more... it's way more a plethora of features, and we have been talking about class and economic position almost in the entire panel discussion now, but we've been excluding all the other characteristics that people use to define themselves or to identify themselves with, and I think those are very important. And I think those characteristics, like are you progressive, are you conservative, what do you think about the position of a woman, what do you think about like gender, what do you think about like, I don't know, like migrant issues. Those are very important and very defining. There was also an investigation that most people actually voted for the right-wing party PVV, not because of socioeconomic factors. Those were not defining. I think it was the correspondent who investigated this. Which
is not an academic institution.
No, in correlation, like in collaboration with, I think, Investico. But the main defining characteristic on why they voted PVV was the migration policies, because those have been talked about extensively in the media. So I don't think analyzing what people are doing online and how they identify with certain issues online is hyperpolitics. and therefore nonsense. I think people spend a lot of time on social media, so we should be taking seriously what they encounter there and how they identify with certain spheres or algorithms, and we should not just look at their economic position and, oh, they're poor and stressed, and oh, we don't have a union, so everybody's going to go to the right. No, everybody's also going to go to the right because we have just like a bombarding all the time with right-wing social media and right-wing social media stuff that gets talked about in the regular media.
You don't think that's related to any substantive position? So you think just because it's bombarded, I would say that would mean that people don't think. I mean, there must be some sort of real, like you said, some real situation that you feel in, you identify with, the situation you perceive, your real material wealth, or the way you see your future, your future of your kids, or the way you see your future in the housing market, or even on the marriage market. It must be related to those sentiments. To say, oh, it's just because they're bombarded. I'm sorry.
Of course,
maybe I'm a materialist. Maybe I'm still Marxist. But I think the structures of society, the economic structures, and the things that you have and can assess, and the power structures that you can assess, those are the really important things. And that I think the left has stopped to do. They have stopped to do not only redistribution, but they also stopped to basically reallocate power from very powerful actors. And this power concentration with those media companies you're talking about, but also with other centers of power, basically undermining the power of the working class and the middle class, who are the pro-democratic coalition. Without them, there is no democracy. Read the work of Russian Stevens and Stevens. Historical analysis show that if you don't have a coalition in a political party between the middle and lower classes, you cannot have a democracy. You need to have this broad coalition of people who are dependent on work, mostly have to offer themselves on the labor market, both in more precarious situations, but even the ones who are relatively well off. We call that the squeezed middle. You don't believe me, but believe Antonucci, read her work, and she clearly shows that even until the deep in the upper middle class, so people who earn 120 to 130, 50,000 euro, they have the same feelings of insecurity. The same feelings of insecurity.
And those are real.
And those are real. Those are real, yes. So it's not
but
only
the
because they're bombarded.
It's different. Like, the feelings of the insecurity are very legitimate, obviously, because we are on the verge of a climate crisis. We have, indeed, we have a housing crisis, but we also have a mental health care crisis. We have an education crisis because we don't have enough teachers. We have not enough people working in healthcare. So we have all kinds of crises. We have a poly crisis, so to speak, and this is where left-wing populism comes in. So the feelings of insecurity are real. I don't think the feelings of insecurity that have usually been investigated in, like, political polls, etc., are the reasons that people voted for the PVV. It's not because I think they're poor or stressed. It's because of media. But, of course, underlying under all of that, there is a real sense of danger. I think that everybody feels and experiences in their day-to-day life. There's all kinds of crises threatening us. Also the nitrogen crisis, and everything just gets postponed, so it gets worse and worse. And a left-wing populist can really work with those sentiments, but point at the right culprits, right? So a left-wing populist should come in now and say, like, you're all right. You're all right to be scared, and you're all right to feel uneasy, and you're all right to feel as if a small elite has been deciding things, because that's actually true. But it's the people who have a lot of money. It's not per se the people who choose to cast, like, diverse actors in a commercial or in a theater play. Those are not the elites. The elites are, like, actual CEOs, like Frans Muller, the Ahold CEO, or I don't know, Steven van Rijswijk, the CEO of ING, and all their networks. Those are the actual people who are causing all your problems and keeping them in place, and we should look at the right culprits. So I think a left-wing populist can really use those sentiments that have now been falsely explained and, I don't know, hijacked by all kinds of other parties who've been saying it's the immigrants or it's the transgender people, like those, like 10,000 people, they're the culprits. Come on.
Yeah, and Okay, I think we're not going to be able to reconcile your position in this given space.
We don't need to.
We
don't need to reconcile everything.
And I think there's a excitation in the room about asking questions. So
exactly.
I will wrap it up with one last final, more practical questions. If you had to speak to our audience, and as you said, I think most people in this audience have, big cultural capital. They go to Spuiven to the event, and they go to an event with such a pretentious title. So, what would you say to these people that have possibly, a desire to participate in progressive politics and to revitalize and rehabilitate the left? What would be your advice in this situation?
At the risk of overstating, I think Elster said socialism is learned. We need to actually. So the left has to tell people again what it is to be left, what left-wing politics is, because I think whole generations have forgotten it. And I think you actually summed up the difference between right-wing and left-wing populism very good when you basically argued you need to kick up. We need to learn to kick up to the rich ones instead of kicking down to the people who are actually also in dire positions, sometimes even more dire positions than the people who are kicking them. So we need to learn basically who are the culprits, right? And that was always the story of the left, of tradition left. We know who the culprits are. We know who have all the power, who have all the money, and we're just going to take that away from them. Through, like Cicerchia, paper stones, we're going to do that nicely by voting, by having strong organizations, and basically we're going to tax them. In the 1970s, tax rates for the highest income was 70%. And why was that? Because we funded a very nice and pleasant and more safe society and a more just society. And so this level of social justice through taxation needs to come back. And I have not heard a lot of social democrats, and also not left-wing populists, by the way, who often forget that it's taxation that needs to be done. But also, for example, I think we should also start what we call grondpolitiek, so the politics of basically owning land. I think we should own land again, because now you see all these speculators buying up land so we cannot build houses because they keep them. They're not going to build houses for your generation. Forget it, the young ones in the room, sorry. But they're not going to do it because they keep on, because it makes money just sitting there. So we need to basically, again, expropriate land. Simple left-wing politics, which we did here in Amsterdam as socialists, immediately expropriate land, and basically also maybe think about renationalizing certain industries. I would say at least railways and all infrastructure, because we paid for it, and why would we give a commercial company everything that we paid for over centuries? And that project is the real project. I'm actually thinking banks and insurance companies as well. It was in the 50s, was also in the program of the Labour Party, but they put it in a very big drawer somewhere. But we should take that out again and think about nationalization, especially of land and of crucial industries. We should start building social housing again, and not mixed projects, but full social housing, high-quality housing, because we have to give a whole generation the biggest asset they can have in the world, and that is the ownership of a house, which is a huge capital over your lifetime, and then we will all win this lottery at one point in our lives.
Thank you. You know that... You also know about like the housing anxieties in Amsterdam, so you know your crowd and you know what is a good talking point.
Social housing.
Lillian.
My advice for, if you're a university student or a master's student, seek out intergenerational political spaces. You are misled in some ways when you get a university education, when you encounter radical ideas. You are taught basically that what we are learning now is the kind of pinnacle of what there is to know. We've done all the critique. We've perfected our positions. We see all the blind spots they didn't see. That's not true. And you have a lot to learn from previous generations that did really important things. And there are some people around you in institutions, maybe in the trade unions, maybe in the parties, maybe in your neighborhoods, who remember that. And they probably want to share it with you, and they don't think you care. Some of those things are the things that meant so much to them. And that conveyor belt, the generational conveyor belt, has been broken. And then you can contribute something new also. You know, they don't have all the answers. But we have cycles of just critical, over-educated arrogance. We do know a lot, but we also clearly don't know what we're doing. Otherwise, some of this would have gone somewhere. So The rise of the far right, and like the success that they're having, it should humble us. Okay, and that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, if you're a middle class person but you're on the left, that's okay. Think about what you can contribute. You don't have to pretend to be poor or working class or whatever. If you are, you're also valuable. But think about the project. Think about what you want out of politics. How to make people think that we can make our lives better together. And be honest about what you can contribute and try to learn something from the people around you. That's my advice.
Thank you. Marthe?
Yeah, for a change, I concur with what has been previously said. So, of course, it sounds like music in my ears, music to my ears when you talk about nationalizing and housing, etc. So, and I absolutely also agree with organize. Find multidisciplinary people in political, maybe even intergenerational organizations. I think one of the examples of a very good organization who's doing exactly that is the Nieuwe Vredesbeweging, the New Peace Movement, that have like people from oude garde, oldies, and young people uniting and combining their expertise. So become active and involved with that if you don't want to get into war. But I would also want to add, not disagree, but add something. So I think we're online a lot, so online social media is very important, and it's important that we have a counter-narrative there. And it doesn't come automatically. It's not like it will automatically, like the truth is like a piece of wood that will automatically float upwards in this stream of online content. No. So you have to support donation-based, like membership-based media. For example, Left Laser and other online left. You can also support. If you like the meme, you can support Links in the News. They actually have a Patreon. So you also have to support media that goes against the stream, that brings a counter-narrative, but that is dependent on donations to continue because they operate outside of advertising or outside of the mainstream media, because they are the only ones who are going to bring the counter-narrative to you, and we have to make that bigger. We have to make sure that people encounter that and even, get exposed to those ideas. Because if we don't, the right wing is going to hijack the entire attention mechanism and make such a fuss that it's also going to be broadcasted on regular talk shows, and it's all going to be Geert Wilders, and Marjolein Faber all day, every day. So if you don't want that, support left-wing media. Thank you.
Thank you all for your answers, and I think now we're going to move into the Q&A part of the discussion. So there's a mic that is going to go around. Please speak into the mic because there's a lot of people in the live stream, and otherwise they cannot hear your question, which would be very sad. So any questions? I think we can start at the very back, like the last. Yes.
Hello, and thank you for the leftist infighting today. That was very, very nice and productive. I will try to solve this for you, though. I think that Marthe is talking about strategy and André was talking about statistics, which I think you're probably in agreement about most things. But I'd like to challenge André on one of his normative conclusions that you draw from the statistics about new parties. So I think that one of the great boons of Bijeen, which is one of these one-cycle parties you talk about, right?
3 cycles they had, I think. I think there were two times in...
I think it's just once.
Maybe one, yeah, you're right.
I think it's just once.
Yeah.
I think one of the great boons of that party, even though they don't exist in the parliament anymore, is that they've changed the narrative about racism in the public consciousness, but also in GroenLinks Partij van de Arbeid. Right? So that's one of the useful things, I think, that one of these small new leftist parties can have, even if they don't actually continue to exist. So how does this gel with your normative conclusion that you drew from the statistics?
So it's very interesting that you think that because I said that most parties die in their infancy, right? So kindersterfte schoot onder de partij, we always said. That means that I don't like small parties or something. No, small parties have big functions in society. So one of them is this getuigenispartij, this sort of showing a new narrative, giving a new voice. In terms of pluralism, of course, new party, our system is crazy, right? I think we're only 2 or 3 countries in the world that have a proportional system and then 0 threshold. And we can't have a threshold with the zielig for the SGP. And so we're never going to do that. So we're always going to have this parliament where you can get in for 80,000 votes. I love that. Yes, you have 27 parties sometimes or 26. Who cares, right? Because these voices are now heard that are in other parliaments maybe not heard. So that's not bad. My point was just empirically, if you want to have a left-wing power again, so if you want to have left-wing power in terms of actually doing things, so actually expropriating soil again to build your houses in order to get a better welfare state again, take care of pensions, take care of health care for the care for the elderly is very problem now. Then you need really a strong movement, because you need to force the right. The right is not gonna the right is not gonna fund this. Okay, they want lower taxation and they want higher personal income. I like to spend my money myself, is what right people say. And we say, well, no, because there's needs in society. Thank you very much, and we need your money a little bit for that. And so you need to have a strong movement, and you need to also have a strong movement in parliament. I'm all in favor of social movement. The whole green parties come from social movements. And social movements are very important to get into, say, political power. But you need to form a political institution, fielding candidates, a strong political party, and not just basically be a getuigenispartij, just saying things. We need to actually do things. How many people do you know live in a PVV house? I know a lot of people who live in a Labour Party house in this country. A Christian Democratic organization, communists even build houses here. The PVV has built 0 houses, 0 schools, 0 streets, nothing. And they never will build anything because they want to break down things and not build things. And we need to build a movement, again, that can build. And I love Bijeen, really. I think it's a fantastic party because it really changed the narrative on many issues. And even forced us to recognize our past, finally, right? Well done. But they're gone. They also didn't build any houses. That's my point. The Vonk, yeah. So you have said, you always have the split-offs. Yeah. Well, good luck to them. They're needed.
Another question in the audience. I think, the one here next to you. It's easier.
Hi. Thank you again for the interesting points made. I have a question specifically about the Dutch case, because we've talked a lot about sort of how to become big as the left, which is a very important discussion to have. And like Laclau move came up, more populist strategies, which I'll agree with. But when I'm reading someone like Laclau move, I'm wondering about sort of the step after, because we still have a culture of, for example, polder politics, coalition government. So you're becoming bigger as the left, but you're also sort of polarizing more, which might be necessary to become bigger. But what happens after? What happens after the elections when you have to make a coalition? So if anyone wants to comment on that, I'd be interested in hearing that.
I think right now, the state that we're in, it would be very bad for the left to step into a coalition with the current political landscape. You will just become the scapegoat of a watered down, not anymore left-wing policy, and will be held responsible for all the failures. So I would say that in the current political climate, even if the left gets a little bit bigger, it should not start governing, but start building institutions and start building media power. I also want to add that sometimes, even when you're not in the coalition, you can still have some power. For example, the whole sporting discount thing. Yes. That was a plan I read today on teletext that they actually canceled that plan. They wanted to scratch student discounts for sporting because I think that it accounted as like unfair competition, and of course VVD was very favorable to the Basic Fit CEOs and all the commercial parties also offering sporting facilities that wanted to have maximum profit and not have competition with like university sporting facilities. So they had this plan of canceling the discounts. Then it created a big fuss. I think also a petition went around. I'm not saying that the petition was the main factor in it. I am saying that some people at the Goede Zaak are also bijeeners. So just saying, bijeen is not dead. And now, because of, I think, media fuzz and a debate, they canceled this idea. So even when you're not in the coalition, with like a detour via media and making a fuzz, you know, and creating like uproar, you can still sometimes cancel certain plans that are very detrimental. So you cannot do absolutely nothing, but I think it's too early for the left to have a parliamentary say. It would only create like a scapegoat out of the left. I think the left should not hyper-focus on parliamentary politics. It should focus on, you know, unionizing, building strong societal organizations, and then at some point overthrowing, of course.
But we have to be careful, because you might say, as students are relatively wealthy, they might now get the money from somewhere else by basically cancel all kinds of local sports in poorer areas. So I'm not cheering right now, because yes, we saved the student sports, but students are actually relatively wealthy when you think about most parts of society, most sections of society. Many students come from middle class and upper class still. And so I think they might get the money now from poorer people. So I'm not cheering. I'm not cheering yet.
Yeah, but so I don't think, like, I'm not sure if you guys disagree, but I don't think the left should immediately, once it starts getting like een zeteltje extra, start dreaming about, you know, becoming prime minister and you know, stepping into the coalition. I'm not sure what you guys think about that.
And we have to quickly remove this leader of the Labour Party, because he will step into the next government ASAP the moment he gets even the smallest foot, a toe in between the door. That guy. Sorry, the two leaders, but I'm meaning the one with previously the beard. Does he still have a beard? Sometimes he doesn't. Anyway, the guy there, the beard guy.
Another question. I'm yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people waiting.
Yeah.
Just quickly, two things.
Please go ahead.
The first observation is that the disintegration of the center is because of the disintegration of the left. The right has never gone away, has always been successful. So the disintegration of the center is the disintegration of the left over the past 30 or 40 years. As Walter Benjamin already put it 40 years ago, the success of right-wing populism is a symptom of the right of fascism. And that's exactly the diagnosis now. Now, the discussion now doesn't stand me very hopeful, because it is a continuation, what I hear, of the very crisis of the left, to the extent that I have no idea today any longer what it means to be on the left. And I think that needs to be urgently addressed. The question today was, is left populism a worthwhile strategy? I would argue it's not. It's a dead-end street. Populism, as we've heard, is based on invoking the people and the constitutive outsider. It must lead to forms of racism, nationalism, etc., also for the left. And we've seen that in many examples of left populism. Not any kind of leftism is populist, but the left should be popular, which is not the same. A big girl being popular and populist. Now, what does it mean to be popular? That is to think back, about what the basis of leftism is. Equality, emancipation, solidarity in an ecologically sensible way. That is not identity politics. That is not about taking care in the health service, education, etc., to make sure that everyone has access to education, that everyone has access to housing, that everyone's children are taken care of, that everyone's elderly people are taken care of. These are the 4 demands of the Communist Manifesto, by the way. Right? So this fundamental idea of equality, fundamental, universal, and without any exclusions. That's why intersectionality is really the problem. That's about neocultural identity politics. But by the case then is, how do we exclude those who do not want to join equality? plenty of those, the CEOs that were mentioned, etc. What kind of violence are we prepared to inflict on those who do not share the struggle for equality? And what's the name of that equality? The only thing I hear is a superb cacophony of critique of what we do not like. What do we call a free, equal, and solidarity-based world? When I was younger, we called it socialism or communism. Who wants to share that name as an affective, emotional fight? People gave their lives for it. That's what we need today. And that means to fight against capitalism, indeed. But not in the way it was done in the 20th century. The class base has changed. I'm going to change now. Like 30% of the people who are working here in Amsterdam are doing it in the platform, not the media, the platform economy. That's the new working class. And how the hell are we going to organize them around a common egalitarian political idea? That's what I want to know, not lamenting the rise of the extreme right, which is of our own making. We who call ourselves left. I would like to hear your opinion on that, and why we should need a word for our desire, our affect. What do we want? And how do we call it? The right knows what it wants. We don't dare to express a political name for what we want. I haven't heard it for a long, long, long time.
Well, I would call it a utopia. Yeah, but in a positive way. I think the name for this society is less important than how you frame that, right? It's how we define it. And I think, for example, that housing and education and healthcare for everybody, so everybody equally, is possible. I don't know. I don't see like how we should gaslight ourselves into that not being possible. What kind of violence should we use on the capital class, like the CEOs and the people who have the capital? Well, I would start with the violence of taxing. Yeah, it's very radical, I understand it. Then maybe taking away their property, maybe sending some of them to jail for all the fraud that they're committing, right? So we don't immediately. I would have expected that somebody would have asked this question, like, does engaging in left-wing populism also automatically mean engaging in violence or hate speech, etc., etc.? Well, I don't think necessarily so. I think there's a whole lot more strategies to be deployed before we ever have to let it get to that point. If we do not engage in left-wing populism, things will only get worse, and we will get to a point that it's like, just, I don't know, anarchy, fighting. So please, let's just start with, I don't know, just in a populist way, attacking CEOs with rhetorics before we actually let it get so far that we are actually in an anarchy and we're fighting for reals. So I don't think we have to use any violence right now.
Not physically?
No. But we can be verbally more aggressive, yeah, most definitely. And I wish that happened more.
Can I disagree with Professor Zwijngaarda on one thing? And I think that I'm correct, right? That you, I recognize you. So I think you're incorrect that the right, the center right, didn't collapse. I think the collapse of Christian democracy in many countries was the collapse of the center, and it was almost simultaneous, even preceding the Social Democrats. So I think that's gone. And what I think what happened there is the second part of your thing was about so it's about identity politics, right? So the fragmented identity politics might be problematic, and I agree with you completely. The problem is, how do we create again an identity that connects people to left-wing politics? And that's exactly the core of the problem, and that this fragmentation between Greens, who are anti-farmer and who get very angry, or either sponsor middle-class things like zonnepanelen, they will not agree with the radical left. And they will not create the same identity. And also this identity politics is very fragmented. I'm getting really confused as an old man now on what I precisely I am. And so I would love to go thinking about, so what would be, how would you create this left-wing identity that connects those people for a long term, because it's a long-term 30, 40, 50 years project, in order to do this real transformative politics in terms of housing, healthcare, education?
But what are we confused about? Like, what is the left-wing, what is not clear about the left-wing identity? The left stands for freedom, for people actually being free, The left stands for people treating each other as worthwhile human beings. The left stands for love. The left stands for happiness. The left stands for determining the own course of your life. If you want to, I don't know, determine the own course of your wreckage, then that's fine as well. But your life is not determined by rich people who have all the power and all the institution. That's what being left is about. Being in nature, not working hard, and celebrating, right? This is clear to everyone? But I don't see the confusion.
Clearly. But let me tell you, that is not going to create a lot of followers. No. Zero, I think actually besides you, very few. Very few.
Let this man in the back ask his question.
Yes.
Well, I want to talk about, I never heard this word.
Wait for your mic, wacht voor de microfoon in.
I didn't hear the word tonight, basic income, unconditionally. And I don't understand. I am of that party in Holland. It's a little party where Mr. André talks a little bit about. We could be chosen in 8 districts of Holland, and we got 1,000 votes. That's not much. But in all the political parties in Holland, there are working groups with the idea of basic income, and they try for years and for years and for years to get into the elite of the parties, and they don't succeed, neither in the SP, neither in the PvdA, neither in the VVD, neither in the CDA. Only in Volt is now a very good and good report written about the possibility to introducing in Holland the basic income. And I want to know about you there, your 4 or 5 people, what you say about basic income and why you don't support this idea. The lady in black talking about communities who has to start up and to defend good ideas and to take power. It is possible to go via taxes and for vermogen om there to get funds and money from the rich in connected with the idea of basic income. And we can also reduce very bureaucratic things in the momentarily social system of Holland. We have had the toeslagouders, etc. And with the idea and implementation of the basic income idea, we can come a lot better into the leftist way, I think.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that I take the UBI proposal seriously because I think it has some advantages. I think the number one advantage is that it makes people less dependent on the labor market, which creates quite a bit more freedom from certain constraints on both politics and whether or not people feel vulnerable to threats or loss of income. So I think that's a really good aspect of UBI. And I think it is, I think there's a hypothetical world in which that can be won through taxation. I think my questions about UBI are just twofold. One is a transition problem, is I'm not quite sure, just in terms, if you're interested in left populism, I'm not quite sure who the coalition is that comes together to support this particular redistribution of wealth. Some people will benefit from it much more than others, and I've always wondered if it would have similar problems that really heavily redistributive welfare states tend to have, where they tend to be by that I mean redistribution heavy from the top to the lowest part of the population. That tends to breed resentment and also can breed pretty reactionary anti-welfarist politics. But even if that, so I've always wondered what the coalition of support would look like and how that feeds back into the political system over time. But I think the more substantive, just assume that question gets answered. issue that I have with universal basic income is that I think if you're interested in, say, socialism, okay, like if you're interested even in just a more democratic economy, there's a big question of like who is going to do necessary labor in society, and how to distribute, you know, the benefits and burdens of that. And I think what socialists want is something a little bit more than redistribution. It tends to be bonds of reciprocity, solidarity, and something like collective self-determination. And so that's the normative kind of ideal, but it serves a function, which is to redistribute the actual labor that is being done in society that we actually all do need to do to cooperate with each other. And who is going to do that isn't a question that gets answered for me with basic income. Even though, you know, if that, I'd take it. You know, I think it's not a bad thing, but I don't quite see it as fitting into my vision, I guess.
Thank you.
Freedom of speech and freedom of having income.
I really encourage you to continue this discussion with a drink at the Borrel because we have to close this event. I want to thank you all for participating. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to the host for facilitating and the people cleaning and keeping this place tidy. We have 2 events coming up in the next few weeks. Next Thursday, we have an event on Ozempic and how it is entangled in neoliberal individualistic conceptions of health and unhealth. It will be in Dutch, but it will be next Thursday. And then on Tuesday the 27th, we have an event on fashion and power. So we would love to see you there as well. And yeah, feel free to grab a drink over there and continue the discussions amongst yourself. Thank you.